You are here because I need somebody to trust. I ain't forgot the time you helped me out in the past. Though maybe you didn't know it was me you was helping exactly. Nobody inside the outfit can be trusted with this. I need somebody from the outside.
I'm not following you, Al.
When I heard what Frank's planning, I said word to him. You can't do this, Frank, I said. You gotta find a better way, Frank. And you know what he says? Through that lawyer he is. You're inside, Al, and I'm out of here handling things now. That's what he says. You know what Frank's planning?
No.
Guess.
I can't.
No, really. Take a shot. Guess.
Gang war? He hit Newberry already.
Yeah, you can kill somebody time to time. If you don't do it on no big scale or make a habit out of it. But there's some people you just can't hit.
Such as?
Such as the mayor of a big city.
What?
Cermak. Frank's gonna hit Cermak.
You're shitting me.
I shit you not. What did I pay $1,000 to come down on the Dixie Flyer to tell you my life story?
I saw Nitty in the hospital. He hates Cermak, all right. I guess it's possible he tries something like that, but it seems...
Crazy. Not just crazy, Ella. Suicide.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your collecting friend, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, it's me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And once again, I'm robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, coming at you from the Robservatory. This is Robservations episode 1013. Yeah. You know, I was looking at my 2025 bingo card today, and I just decided to tear it up. Tear it up. 2025 bingo card just went away today. Because there was already so much that wasn't on my bingo card, I figured it's already useless, and we're not even 3 weeks into the new year. So, bye-bye, 2025 bingo card. I'm just going to keep walking forward with my eyes wide open. Of course, we lost David Lynch this week. Mr. Euchre, too, if you're a baseball fan, and a funny late-night talk show host guest. But for me, the loss of David Lynch, who I'd met a couple of times, it was really, look, he lived, I always think about whenever we lose a celebrity, especially somebody like David Lynch, who's left us so many of his great works that remain uniquely him. It's great that we live in a time and in a place where we were able to experience a lot of his work. And, when I was becoming a burgeoning imagination connoisseur as a kid, when I got my first VCR in 1980, I was 13, and I was able to go and get these movies that I'd only heard about, but I was finally able to see them. And, of course, Eraserhead, Mr. Lynch's first feature, was one of the first movies that I wanted to find because I hadn't seen it. And of course, I saw it and NTSC Video didn't do it justice. But then, of course, Elephant Man, which is a very different movie than Eraserhead. And then, of course, he directed Dune. And we all know I liked Dune, to be honest. I understand all the problems in it, but there's something about that movie, whether you like it or not, it's very unique. The production design's amazing. The acting is incredible. And there's a lot that I really like about that film. But then, of course, I think David Lynch really solidified himself into the zeitgeist with Blue Velvet, and then following soon after was Twin Peaks, and then, of course, Wild at Heart. And I think, and then obviously his social media presence. He was just a really fascinating guy, and he was definitely a unique artist and a unique soul. And I'm happy that I got to live at a time when I got to watch him and his output throughout my entire life. And I was really sad that we've lost him, but I think he led a terrific life, and seeing all the outpouring from people on social media and then in and around various industry trades, it was really nice to see how many people talked about how they were touched by his work. So on one hand, I'm sad that he's gone, but then on the other, I feel privileged that I was able to spend time on the same planet that he inhabited during his life. And he was obviously here for my entire life, and most of my life as an imagination connoisseur. Now, contrary to that, which is something, one of the reasons I couldn't go on last night, because I was just so angry thinking about it. And a lot of people have asked me to talk about this, and I really don't want to talk about it, to be honest. But I figure because so many people have known this about me, I have said many times that The Sandman, Neil Gaiman's The Sandman comic, is my favorite comic book of all time. Because not only did its particular brand of storytelling appeal to me, but it is a work that was about the importance of storytelling. And I think, the revelations about, I did read the article, the entire article, and I felt sad, because here's what I have always thought. I mean, the age-old question: can you separate the art from the artist? And the thing about authors, and I hate to say this, but of all the people that I've met and I certainly don't mean this to condemn my author friends, because that's not true, but in terms of people that I've met that I would consider celebrities in my own life, the people that have ultimately wound up disappointing me the most have been authors. And it shouldn't really be surprising, because writing is a solitary activity where you're in your head a lot of the time. Now, I've met a lot of authors that are dynamic, wonderful people. I'm collaborating with one of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life, which is Max Allan Collins. And he is a loving family man, a loving father, a loving grandfather, and he's just a terrific, terrific guy who's loved one woman in his life, and she's also delightful. So I don't mean this as a condemnation of all authors, because I love books and I love writing, and it means a great deal to me. But the thing about Neil Gaiman was, since I started reading his work, I mean, I really first encountered it in comics form, in things like Black Orchid. But then, of course, Sandman really spoke to me, and Sandman debuted in '89, a Vertigo book. And then, of course, I read all of his novels, and I've been on a panel with him, got to meet him, and spoke with him. He was going to actually be in Free Enterprise 2, playing himself. And back when I was working on Star Trek 10 years ago, well, a little bit more than 10 years ago now, started 14 years ago, when I was working on the Star Trek documentaries for Blu-ray, I went into Diane Nelson, who was at the time the president of DC Entertainment. She was in charge of Warner Premiere. She was the president of Warner Premiere at Warner Brothers when we made The Hills Run Red. And I had worked for Global Brand Management that she was head of when I worked on Superman Returns and did a lot of work. So I went in and pitched the idea of doing a 25th anniversary documentary about the Sandman, because I had heard that Neil Gaiman was making, he was doing a Sandman overture, going back to the beginning and telling the story about how the Sandman came to be imprisoned, that we saw in the first episode of the Netflix show and the first episode of the comic. And it's interesting because I went in and pitched the idea to both Diane and, of course, Jeff Johns. She brought Jeff Johns in the room. And the funny thing is I met Jeff Johns at a dinner at Musso and Frank's in Hollywood right before he was going to write Teen Titans. And I was very impressed by Jeff Johns. He worked for Richard Donner. He worked on, for instance, one of the great documentaries, the Superman, the movie documentary back in the day. And so I went in and pitched to Diane a Sandman 25th anniversary documentary that I'd already talked to Neil Gaiman about doing. And I wanted to go back and talk about how the influence of Sandman changed the comic industry, and it led to things like Hot Topic in malls and what Sandman did to the audience, and it brought women into reading comics because of the character Death. And yeah, Jeff Johns killed it. He said, well, your idea isn't fleshed out enough. I'm like, I'm only here to see if it's okay. I'm not going to flesh out an idea if I can't okay it, if I don't have the okay from you guys. I mean, I've already made you a 3-hour Superman documentary before. I'd love to do this documentary. And Jeff Johns kind of killed my idea in the room. And I was like, bruh, so that's why I have thousands of pages of Jeff Johns comic work on these shelves, but that made me not particularly like him. And then he wrote Doomsday Clock, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. But Jeff, I both love you and I hate you, buddy. But you killed my documentary, which now I thank you for. But, coming to terms with when you feel somebody has somehow got a connection, has codified your worldview through their own work. Another thing that has done that for me is the movie Amelie. When I saw Amelie, I really felt, it's a strange thing to say, but the movie really spoke to my worldview. It really got into my headspace and into my heart, so to speak. And I'm like, here's a film that if you wanted to understand me as a person, I know it seems strange, but Amelie is something that you could kind of understand where I would be coming from in life. And the same is true of the Sandman. There's a lot of other things, obviously Star Trek, but in terms of who I am as a person, and in my emotional state. So reading everything that, the things that came out it was hard for me it was hard for me to understand reading those things, how the man that created all these works that I've admired and the person I admired for such a long time did the things that he has been accused of doing. And it's not what's so disappointing is it's like the most puerile fandom. There's and I know people can say that Calliope, the first thing when I saw that, Call Me Master, I'm like, what is he? He's Richard Maddock. He's actually he wrote a story about basically himself where he's a monumental douchebag and the Sandman comes and punishes him. The story Calliope. And it was, I really, and then I realized, one of the things I'm particularly, I guess sensitive to is the sexual abuse of women by men. And I've told this story before, but when I was 16 years old, somebody came to me to help them. Somebody when I was a sophomore in high school. They were also a sophomore in high school, and they had been having a horrible experience with their mother's boyfriend who'd been abusing them since they were 12. And this person came to me for help, and I helped them get the help they needed, took them right to the police station. And it was an ordeal that I really couldn't tell anybody about, and hearing what went on. And I've often thought that one of the great things about human sexuality and being able to share that with somebody is it's a two-way street. And so often men are fucking Neanderthals when it comes to that aspect of their lives, which I've never understood. It's a two-way street. And when you when you share yourself that way with somebody else, it's more of a sacrament. And I think it's the great, it's a physical representation of the great confluence of art, emotion, creativity, when you're with somebody and you can physically you together, two of you, it takes two to tango, are enjoying the physicality of our own bodies. And when you're with somebody and you can do something that turns them on, and they can do something that turns you on, and you learn how to, it's like a dance. And it's, by the way, it's a fucking skill. And if there's one thing I can impart to all of you imagination connoisseurs, and I mean to be gender specific, men are fucking shitty at sex. And figure it out, guys. I mean, let me just say, you'll have a much better life. It is a skill set that you need to learn. And I think a lot of men, as I move through life, I realize, boy, from what I've heard over my lifetime, boy, we're desperately in need. I think our civilization would be much better. And it's been with the rise of social media and the rise of the ease of getting access to pornography, it's worse than ever, because it's just, please learn, because it will make the world a better place all the way around. And if you think of it as a partner activity, and you should learn that it's a give and take. I mean, I could do I won't, but I could do a whole show about this. And it just, the kind of behavior, it was just reprehensible to me. And I couldn't come to grips with it. And I was angry for most of the week, which is why I didn't do a show, because, I've got all the absolute editions of Sandman. I've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on Neil Gaiman's work. And it's like, what do you do? I'm not going to burn it, because the work itself has value. But, I mean, now it's forever tainted. And it's, look, I've had to deal with this other times, but in this one is particular because reading is such an insular, you're in your headspace. And I don't know, it comes down to what do we owe each other? It's a philosophical conversation that you probably need. I'm gonna have to work through my grief on this one, because I was really angry about it, and because it mattered. And I can't tell you how many times I've read all the issues of the Sandman, and how many times I even have the annotated books about the Sandman. So I've got the absolute edition of the Sandman, and I have the annotated coffee table books on the Sandman. And then I have a whole 2 shelves of Neil Gaiman's work right up above my head. And, I'm not offering anything, any wise pearls on this one, because I don't have any. I'm just angry. And, I'm also angry because, to be honest, I was hoping we'd get all 75 issues of the Sandman, at least the Sandman proper story, adapted to television. And I know we're going to get Season of Mists, which is one of my favorite Sandman stories. And I don't even know if they're going to air it anymore. Maybe they will. I mean, think about it. All those people who are making that great show, how they've been betrayed by this long-time behavior. But anyway, it really made me angry, in addition to everything else that's going on. And the other night, 2 nights ago, I'm sitting here editing. Oh, this is another thing. I'm editing True Noir. By the way, we're a week late. I apologize to all of our supporters. Because of the fires and because of the power situation, I am behind a week. So you'll be getting 2 episodes next week. You'll be getting episode 5, Tower Town and Magic City, on Thursday. And you'll be getting Welcome to Miami, Mr. Heller, chapters 5 and chapter 6 next week. And they're very complex episodes, and a lot of work went into them. So 2 nights ago, I'm sitting here and I'm editing, and it's 12:08. And it felt like somebody, I've lived through many different earthquakes, and there are different kinds of earthquakes, but there's rolling earthquakes, but sometimes there's earthquakes where there's just one big jolt, and it feels like somebody picked up the structure lifted up the structure and just dropped it. So at 12:08 2 nights ago, that's what happened here. I'm sitting here editing, and then it was just like boom, and I thought, did a bomb go off? Turns out that it was only a 2.9 magnitude quake, but the epicenter was 4.4 miles from where I live. That is the closest I've ever been to seismic activity like that in the 36 years I've lived in Los Angeles. And it was as big a jolt as I ever have felt. Of course, Elizabeth was asleep up in the house, and I'm down here in the studio. and the dogs went crazy, and it was nuts. And I'm sure they could feel, I couldn't feel aftershocks. I mean, 2.9 is not a big, it's not big, but when you're close to the epicenter, it was like, wow, man, that was wild. And it just was a big jolt, and you're sitting around going, and I had to walk around, and there was some car alarms going off, and you never know. You don't know. Is it, I mean, in 2025, all bets are off. You know, if disclosure happens and interdimensional beings or aliens land a la Day the Earth Stood Still on the Mall, or the Canamitz from To Serve Man from the Twilight Zone, if they land in Washington, D.C. at Trump's inauguration and they say, take us to your new president, it would not surprise me. Nothing would surprise me anymore, especially after what's happened in 2025. Whoosh, whoosh. Bye-bye, bingo card. But anyway, now, I was going to do this show last night, and I've been wanting to do this. A couple of people, Alvaro sent me this article that was in The Atlantic earlier, a couple weeks ago. And I wanted to go over it, especially because the impending TikTok ban, the Supreme Court upheld the ban on TikTok, and the Biden administration, they're punting it into Trump's administration to see if it will be enforced. Will TikTok go off the air? I don't know. But I mean, I do think as I move through life that social media, as much as I use it, I think social media has been incredibly detrimental overall to our civilization. I mean, it's been great in some ways, but overall it's been detrimental because it has, I mean, and I do think it's, a lot of people have done this on purpose. Human nature is human nature, and it's not hard to weaponize. And human nature has been weaponized against us. And, you know, you can see there's many documentaries that have gone into it. It's not a conspiracy theory either. It has been weaponized against us. It's being used against us in many different ways. But there was an article that I read that I thought, without, pissing everybody off, it's a long article, but I want to read it. I thought the article was really great, and I could opine on it. Maybe going through this, it'll bring me some clarity, much needed clarity. This is from The Atlantic, and it was published on January 8th. By the way, yes, I'm going to drink a cocktail on this show. And I hope that's okay with you. I don't know if I'll finish it. But this article is great. The Anti-Social Century. Yeah. And this is by Derek Thompson. And this is in the February 2025 issue of The Atlantic. And let's just jump into it. Under the headline, it says, Americans are now spending more time alone than ever. It's changing our personalities, our politics, and even our relationship to reality. The bar is closed. Thank God, no, it's not. A short drive from my home in North Carolina is a small Mexican restaurant with several tables and 4 stools at a bar facing the kitchen. On a sweltering afternoon last summer, I walked in with my wife and daughter. The place was empty. But looking closer, I realized that business was booming. The bar was covered with to-go food, 9 large brown bags. As we ate our meal, I watched half a dozen people enter into the restaurant without sitting down to eat. Each one pushed open the door, walked to the counter, picked up a bag from the bar, and left. In the delicate choreography between kitchen and customer, not a word was exchanged. The space once reserved for that most garrulous social encounter, the bar hangout, had been reconfigured into a silent depot for customers to grab food to eat at home. Until the pandemic, the bar was bustling and popular with regulars. It's just a few seats, but it was a pretty happening place, Ray Mosher, the restaurant's general manager, told me. I can't tell you how sad I've been about it, she went on. I know it hinders communications between customers and staff to have to-go bags taking up the whole bar, but there's nowhere else for the food to go. She put up a sign, bar seating closed. The sign on the bar is a sign of the times for the restaurant business. In the past few decades, the sector has shifted from tables to takeaway, a process that has accelerated through the pandemic and continued even as the health emergency abated. In 2023, 74% of all restaurant traffic came from off-premises customers, that is, from takeout and delivery, up from 61% before COVID, according to the National Restaurant Association. Now, I have to say that, these kind of statistics are kind of worrisome, but it made me think back to Los Angeles and in my 20s and 30s, mostly my 20s, but before I was married, yes, I was married. Before I was married, L.A., frequently you would end your evening at some kind of an all-night diner. My friend Sean and I would go to this place called Ed DeBevick's on Beverly. That was a hangout for rappers, and that place got raucous after 2 a.m. It was a great, fun place to go to, but then it closed. But it was the kind of place where you'd have people literally dancing on the tables, then people were picking up the tables as the girls were dancing on the tables. It was out of control. And then all the late night diners, Jerry's Famous Deli, that was open 24 hours, and a lot of other, there were so many places that and we would end our nights, we'd be lit, but you'd have conversations with people, and it was a Friday and Saturday night thing. You would talk, you would hang out, you'd catch up with one another, and you'd be lit, so you'd tell each other your secrets, or if you had a table full of 4 people or whatever, you'd still try and pick up the girls that came in and sat next to you. I mean, it was all about the social aspects of it, and I have to say, it was part of the great thing about being in our 20s, was having these late night places to go to, and a lot of them are no longer. They don't exist. Jerry's Deli, people are like, what's that? And it was, I can't tell you how many turkey sandwiches I had at Jerry's Deli late night. But anyway, the flip side of less dining out is more eating alone. The share of U.S. adults having dinner or drinks with friends on any given night has declined by more than 30% in the past 20 years. There's an isolationist dynamic that's taking place in the restaurant business, the Washington, D.C. restaurateur Steve Salas told me. I think people feel uncomfortable in the world today. They've decided that their home is their sanctuary. It's not easy to get them to leave. Even when Americans eat at restaurants, they're much more likely to do so by themselves. According to data gathered by the online reservations platform OpenTable, solo dining has increased by 29% in just the past 2 years. The number one reason is the need for more me time. The evolution of restaurants is retracing the trajectory of another American industry, Hollywood. In the 1930s, video entertainment existed only in theaters, and the typical American went to the movies several times a month. Film was necessarily a collective experience, something enjoyed with friends and in the company of strangers. But technology has turned film into a home delivery system. Today, the typical American adult buys about 3 movie tickets a year and watches almost 19 hours of television, the equivalent of roughly 8 movies, on a weekly basis. In entertainment, as in dining, modernity has transformed a ritual of togetherness into an experience of homebound reclusion and even solitude. The privatization of American leisure is one part of a much bigger story. Americans are spending less time with other people than at any other period for which we have trustworthy data, going back to 1965. Between that year and the end of the 20th century, in-person socializing slowly declined. From 2003 to 2023, it plunged by more than 20%, according to the American Time Use Survey, an annual study conducted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Among unmarried men and people younger than 25, the decline was more than 35%. Alone time predictably spiked during the pandemic, but the trend has started long before most people have ever heard of a novel coronavirus and continued after the pandemic was declared over. According to Angan Adelaide, an economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, Americans spent even more time alone in 2023 than they did in 2021, He categorized a person as alone, as I will throughout this article, if they are the only person in the room, even if they are on the phone or in front of a computer. Now, here's the thing. The problem that I see with that, and what I've noticed in my own life, I have no statistics to back this up, I can only tell you what I know, is that I like being out in the world. And as you may know, I've annoyed many a girlfriend. I talk to people everywhere I go. I ask questions, I listen to them, and I like going to a bar by myself because I'll sit down and strike up a conversation with somebody. I'm always social wherever I go. And it's funny because I started noticing something when I realized that a lot of kids are not getting their driver's licenses at 16. And part of that is because the freedom that a driver's license would bring you, especially when I was growing up in the 80s, we don't need it anymore. You already have that freedom because things like Uber and Lyft allow people that if you can get a debit card or something, or you got your parents' card, you don't need a driver's license to get you where you want to go. You can just Uber or Lyft. But here's the thing about that. When you have a driver's license, and when I turned 16, as it was true of probably everybody I went to school with, the day you turned 16, you got your license. And you go pick up your friends, go see a movie, go somewhere. It was sort of a rite of passage. It represented freedom. No longer were you, I didn't have to ask my parents to take me to or from a movie. I mean, we had a great metro bus system in the Seattle area, and I knew it, as I've told you on the show. I started riding the bus by myself or with my friends when I was 10 years old, motoring around the city. That's now something apparently kids can't do. 10-year-old kids going around the city by themselves? Oh, no. But the thing is, when you had your car, you weren't just driving to and fro. You would stop at a gas station. You had to learn gas station etiquette. If there was a line, you had to know how to wait. If you went in to pay for your gas, you had a little chit-chat with somebody behind the counter. You would see people, excuse me. You would interact with other people. But the real thing about driving, and I have nothing to back this up, but you as a driver are acutely aware of the rest of the world because you're on roads where there's all kinds of people going to and fro, whether you're on a freeway, whether you're on surface streets. You're keenly aware that you are in a living, breathing society, that you have to, and you don't know where people are going. You got to anticipate their moves. And even in the way people are driving, you might not think about this, but you're learning something about people. You're learning something about the systems that surround us. Just seeing how everything works, understanding, you're keenly aware of things like stoplights, and you appreciate it when the roads don't have potholes in them. So there's things about the world around us that you're just osmosis. You're getting in your head simply because you're driving. Now, if kids at 16 aren't doing this, and they get into Ubers and Lyfts, this is just my own personal theory, and they're on their phones, those osmosis lessons that you were getting as a driver, you're losing them. And what you're seeing, what you're doing is you're interacting with other people even though you're just driving. You see people's faces. You give people a nod. You let somebody go. What my favorite thing is, personally right now, there's a gesture that motorcycle riders give you. It's the left hand. It's the left hand wave. And if you see them coming from behind you and you nudge to one side or another and you're aware of them, I always love getting the little wave. Because it's silly for me to say this, but these are the things in my own personal life that I would never talk about, except, of course, online, live to the internet. I really enjoy when I get a little wave from a motorcyclist because it shows that I've seen the motorcyclist, he's seen what I've done, and he acknowledges it. I know it seems silly, but it's a human interaction that costs no money. And by the way, it happens every single day when you're driving on the freeways of LA, because there's a lot of freeways to drive. And I know it's a little thing, but it's a human communication issue that shows that you've seen somebody, you've tried to do something nice for them, and they've acknowledged that you've done it. It's a cool little thing. I mean, maybe it goes into the same realm as like always taking the grocery cart and you put it back where all the other grocery carts go, you know? Or my latest thing that I figured out to do is when I go to our local grocery store, closes at 10. A lot of the time I roll in there at like 9:40 or something to get dog food or whatever. And you're carrying a little plastic bag rather than leave it, or the plastic container, the plastic basket. You know, you don't need a cart. You got the basket. When I'm paying and there's not very many people, I will take my plastic basket and go put it next to the door where I picked it up and come back and finish paying as things are going through the register, simply so no one has to pick up after me. It's the same thing. Look, man, I don't fucking like people who don't take their carts and put them in wherever the carts go. I'm not saying you have to take it and put it in the front of the grocery store, but in most places in the parking lot, you stack up plus I always like it when somebody who works at the grocery store takes the stacked up carts and pushes it. I don't know, call it the kid in me. I'm like, that's pretty cool that somebody figured out how to do all that. I don't like people that leave their carts around. Those people I have no use for. They put their phones, they don't put their phones on vibrate, and they look at their phones in the theater. Same fucking people. There's no civility there. Anyway, let's get back to this article. Eroding companionship can be seen in numerous odd and depressing facts about American life today. Men who watch television now spend 7 hours in front of the TV for every hour they spend hanging out with somebody outside their home. The typical female pet owner spends more time actively engaged with her pet than she spends in face-to-face contact with friends of her own species. Since the early 2000s, the amount of time that Americans say they spend helping or caring for people outside their nuclear family has declined by more than a third. Self-imposed solitude might just be the most important social fact of the 21st century in America. Perhaps unsurprisingly, many observers have reduced this phenomenon to the topic of loneliness. In 2023, Vivek Murthy, Joe Biden's Surgeon General, published an 81-page warning about America's epidemic of loneliness, claiming that its negative health effects were on par with those of tobacco use and obesity. A growing number of public health officials seem to regard loneliness as the developed world's next critical public health issue. The United Kingdom now has a minister for loneliness. So does Japan. But solitude and loneliness are not one and the same. It's usually a very healthy emotional response to feel some loneliness, the NYU sociologist Eric Kleinberg told me. That cue is the thing that pushes you off the couch and into face-to-face interaction. The real problem here, the nature of America's social crisis, is that most Americans don't seem to be reacting to the biological cue to spend more time with other people. Their solitude levels are surging, while many measures of loneliness are actually flat or dropping. A 2021 study of the widely used UCLA loneliness scale concluded that the frequently used term loneliness epidemic seems exaggerated. Although young people are lonelier than they once were, there is little evidence that loneliness is rising more broadly today. A 2023 Gallup survey found that the share of Americans who said they experienced loneliness a lot of the day yesterday declined by roughly 1/3 from 2021 to 2023, even as alone time, by Adelaide's calculation, rose slightly. Day to day, hour to hour, we are choosing this way of life. Its comforts, its ready entertainments, but convenience can be a curse. Our habits are creating what Adelaide has called a century of solitude. This is the antisocial century. Over the past few months, I've spoken with psychologists, political scientists, sociologists, and technologists about America's antisocial streak. Although the particulars of these conversions differed, a theme emerged. The individual preference for solitude, scaled up across society and exercised repeatedly over time, is rewiring America's civic and psychic identity. And the consequences are far-reaching for our happiness, our communities, our politics, and even our understanding of reality. Now, I would say that's true because, when you're alone, and I spend a lot of time alone here, but I have this outlet in the sense that I'm talking to people, and I talk to a lot of people on the phone all day long and stuff, and I like to go out and do things. But if you're not having other contact with other people, you're not getting checked. Your point of view isn't getting checked. The things you believe aren't getting checked. And I think it's really easy to fall in if you're not getting a counterpoint, or you're not falling up against or butting up against ideas that are different than yours, especially from your friends. If you're not talking to people who you like and respect, who feel differently than you do, then I think I would just assume, and I've seen this in my own mind. I mean, I have no data to back this up, but I mean, it's easy to get radicalized. It's easy to think that your way of thinking is the only way of thinking. And I think one of the great things about interacting, and especially with Americans, I think Americans, we like to get together and be boisterous with one another and sometimes have spirited discussions about different points of view. And I think that it's vital, especially in our social media age, where we are literally getting programmed. We're getting programmed by everybody, by people that want our money, that people want our ideology, that people want our admiration, that people who want our devotion. And the thing is, when everybody's at home by themselves, it's a lot more easy to program people and make them do what you want them to do than it is if people are out in the public square butting up against these ideas that they're experiencing on their own. And, again, I have no statistics to prove any of that. It's just an observation that I particularly I believe in. So anyway, the first half of the 20th century was extraordinarily social. From 1900 to 1960, church membership surged, as did labor union participation. Marriage rates reached a record high after World War II, and the birth rate enjoyed a famous boom. Associations of all sorts thrived, including book clubs and volunteer groups. The New Deal made America's branch library system the envy of the world. Communities and developers across the country built theaters, music venues, playgrounds, and all kinds of gathering places. But in the 1970s, the U.S. entered an era of withdrawal, as the political scientist Robert D. Putnam famously documented in his 2000 book, Bowling Alone. Some institutions of togetherness, such as marriage, eroded slowly. Others fell away swiftly. From 1985 to 1994, active involvement in community organizations fell by nearly half. The decline was astonishingly broad, affecting just about every social activity and every demographic group that Putnam tracked. What happened in the 1970s? Kleinberg, the sociologist, notes a shift in political priorities. The government dramatically slowed its construction of public spaces. Places that used to anchor community life, like libraries and school gyms and union halls, have become less accessible or shuttered altogether, he told me. Putnam points, among other things, to new moral values, such as the embrace of unbridled individualism. But he found that two of the most important factors were by then ubiquitous technologies, the automobile and the television set. Starting in the second half of the century, Americans used their cars to move further and further away from one another, enabling the growth of the suburbs, and with it a retreat into private backyard patios, private pools, a more private life. Once Americans got out of the car, they planted themselves in front of the television. From 1965 to 1995, the typical adult gained 6 hours a week in leisure time. They could have devoted that time 300 hours a year to community service or pick up basketball or reading or knitting or all four. Instead, they funneled almost all of this extra time into watching more TV. And here's a chart. I'll leave it here so you can see it and zoom in, pause it, whatever. It goes into declines and age groups and things like that. Television transformed Americans' interior decorating, our relationships, and our communities. In 1970, just 6% of sixth graders had a TV set in their bedroom. In 1999, that proportion had grown to 77%. Time diaries in the 1990s showed that husbands and wives spent almost 4 times as many hours watching TV together as they spent talking to each other in a given week. People who said TV was their primary form of entertainment were less likely to engage in practically every social activity that Putnam counted. Volunteering, church-going, attending dinner parties, picnicking, giving blood, even sending greeting cards. Like a murderer in Clue, the death of social connections in America had any number of suspects. But in the end, I believe the likeliest culprit is obvious. It was Mr. Farnsworth in the living room with the tube. Now, I can see a lot of people's comments and things are coming in, so why don't I jump in and see, what are you guys saying? What are you guys saying? Let's see, shall we? Okay. Garrett Groover says, as a Prince fan, what do you think of his movies? Would you buy Under the Cherry Moon and Graffiti Bridge if they got 4K releases? Bruh, come on. Look, I really like Under the Cherry Moon. I'm not a fan of Graffiti Bridge, but there's great songs in it. Like I love, there's Thieves in the Temple, Melody Cool is a great tune, which I even like. I look at the music. The movie is a music video, but it's not good. Prince was not a film director. But of course I would. Purple Rain looks great in 4K. I'd love to get Sign of the Times in 4K, to be honest. Philip Brett Moore has upgraded his membership to a PGS Hero. Thank you. We are having a member call tomorrow. It will not be broadcast live, but we are having a member call tomorrow at noon. At 11, I think. I don't know. I haven't even looked. I just know we're having one. Garrett Groover goes on to say, do you consider the Russo brothers, John Watts or Sean Levy, to be auteurs? If not, what category do they fall into? You know what? I don't consider them to be auteurs because I really do think that ultimately an auteur has to be a writer-director. Or has developed over the course of their career a signature style. Look, I think John Watts and the Russo brothers and Sean Levy are fine directors. But I would say that they're journeyman directors. They really know how to put a film together if they have the right script. But I wouldn't put them in the same league. I mean, Spielberg, the only movie, I don't know how many movies he's actually, I think, like he has writing credit on Close Encounters, but Steven Spielberg is an auteur. Because of the way he directs. I don't think that I would consider all three of those directors auteurs. But they're good at what they do. They're really, really, really great journeyman directors. A Major Chai Chai says, I sent you an email with something to cheer you up. Hope it helped. You know what? To be honest, I haven't been on email much because I've been so busy. Let's see what you sent me. And let's see. I'll see what you sent me, and since you ask, I'll watch it right now. Something to cheer you up from the Major. I saw your note that you were postponing your Robcast because you were in a mood and not feeling it. In case you're still feeling off, here's something that always makes me smile. However, keep in mind this came from a veteran support group on Instagram. Okay, let's see what it says. Not every flower can say love, but a rose can. Not every plant survives a thirst, but a cactus can. Not every not every retard can read, but look at you go, little buddy. Today, you should take a moment and send an encouraging message. Today, you should take a moment and send an encouraging message to a fucked up friend, just as I have done. I don't care if you lick windows or screw farm animals. You hang in there, Cupcake, because you're fucking special to me, and you're my friend. Look at you smiling at your phone, you crayon-eating motherfucker. Okay, that's pretty good. I said retard on the air. Demonetize. That's the second funniest thing I've read all week. I don't know if you saw it, but I retweeted a video of a guy. I don't know if he was Scottish or British or what. Forgive my UK friends. He was talking about a certain chord, a chord that's in all the James Bond movies. And he gives you a scenario, and then he played the chord. Like, I was like, what's he going to... I swear to God, I laughed for 5 minutes. I could not. I was crying. I was laughing so hard. I tweeted it. You can see on my social media. I don't know if anyone who's not a James Bond fan would think it's nearly as funny as I did, but it was really funny. It's just, and when you hear the chord, it's not what you think either. But when you hear it, it's so perfect. I was like, that is the funniest shit I have certainly going to see all week. So thank you for that from Major Chai Chai. Thomas Logan says, insufferably self-righteous people tend to be creeps. Sanctimonious personas mask their indiscretions. I like Gaiman's work. I've never liked Gaiman. Thing is, I met him. He was really nice to me. By the way, Thomas Logan sent a really great letter that I was going to save to read on Let's Get Physical Media about Remembrance. He tells a great story about David Lynch. So I was going to save that for Let's Get Physical Media. Oscar Herrera says, we've replaced lived experiences with curated entertainment, as reality TV and social media make us antisocial and afraid to seek our own adventures. Oh man, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that's whatever happened to Boldly Go? Whatever happened to that? I mean, also look, I mean, one of my great motivations starting as a teenager was I wanted to meet girls. Not so I can impose myself on them, but so I could figure out, here's the great secret when it comes to girls and, getting busy. They want to get busy as much as you do, and they bring stuff to the party. It's a two-way street, and the best street to be on is where you all meet in the middle and you share. It's the sharing, and in the sharing we get stronger. Trust me. And that's a skill. Please, guys, learn to fuck. I'm telling you, life is much better off than just shoving your thing where you think it's not supposed to go or whatever. I mean, my God, whoever thought that? I'm reading this. Maybe that was the most upsetting thing about Neil Gaiman. How shitty in bed he was. Jesus Christ, dude. Ugh, gross. Jurassic Joey. By the way, I don't mean to denigrate the victims or anything like that. I was making, a bad joke, but my God, man. It's two-way street. Women do not exist to service you, dude. Just saying. And by the way, it's never going to be as good. What you want them, it takes two to tango, everybody. Learn to tango. If you don't want to learn to be great in bed, learn to tango. You'll get there. Jurassic Joey says, welcome to an Imagination Connoisseur. Thanks, man. Cyanagiri says, he's been a member for 27 months. Skiz Spivak Esquire has gifted 10 Burnettwork memberships. Well, I'll see you guys hopefully all tomorrow at the member call. Oscar Herrera says, I hate who steals my solitude without, in exchange, offering me true company. Nietzsche. Oh, I love that. That's pretty great. And by the way, somebody left me a tip earlier today. The Banshees of Ed Sheeran. I've always loved seeing that. I've never shed tears in movies when I was younger. And I always found it strange that people would cry. Now that I'm older, I realized it was because I had yet to live emotional moments in life. Now at 38, I've experienced love, hate, joy, and pain. I can empathize now. What a great tip. That's a great sentiment. I totally agree with you. What an interesting thing to say. Very interesting. 1001 Johnny. Oh, now you have a part 2 here, but where's part 1? Let me see if I just didn't get part 1. let me refresh 1001 Johnny and see if part 1 came in. Yes. Anonymous, I would assume this is 1001 Johnny, says, I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all of my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Ecclesiastes 2:10 and 11. Good words. See, like I've said, everybody, whether you're a believer or not, it's always good to read the holy books because there is so much wisdom in them. And whether you are reading the Bible, the Holy Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, whatever the hell you want to read, it's always a good thing to know because so much of Western civilization is derived from those ideas and Eastern civilization. So yeah, 5.toast sends in a $20 super chat and says, one of my favorite YouTube rabbit holes lately has been the theme of how algorithmic curation works to isolate us. The filter bubble that Spotify, Netflix, and Google use reinforces our present interests and minimizes newness. Dude, I am right there with you. I have to say, I don't like it if like I subscribe to a lot of channels, but if I don't look at them like on a daily basis, they just don't show up in my feed anymore. And I hate that. I have to go back and seek out channels that I've been watching for a long time. Well, now back to the article. Phone bound. If two of the 20th century's iconic technologies, the automobile and the television, initiated the rise of American aloneness, the 21st century's most notorious piece of hardware has continued to fuel and has indeed accelerated our national antisocial streak. Countless books, articles, and cable news segments have warned Americans that smartphones can negatively affect mental health and may be especially harmful to adolescents. Maybe. But the fretful coverage is, if anything, restrained given how greatly these devices have changed our conscious experience. The typical person is awake for about 900 minutes a day. American kids and teenagers spend, on average, about 270 minutes on weekdays and 380 minutes on weekends gazing into their screens, according to the Digital Parenthood Initiative. By this account, screens occupy more than 30% of their waking life. Some of this screen time is social after a fashion, but sharing videos or texting friends is a pale imitation of face-to-face interaction. More worrisome than what young people do on their phone is what they aren't doing. Young people are less likely than in previous decades to get their driver's license, or to go on a date, or to have more than one close friend, or to hang out with their friends at all. The share of boys and girls who say they meet up with friends almost daily outside school hours has declined by nearly 50% since the early 1990s, with the sharpest downturn occurring in the 2010s. The decline of hanging out can't be shrugged off as a benign generational change, something akin to a preference for bell-bottoms over skinny jeans. Human childhood, including adolescence, is a uniquely sensitive period in the whole of the animal kingdom. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt, actually I always say Haidt, but it's Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt, by the way, I cannot recommend you read him more. I mean, the man has been studying this and what's been going on with our civilization, especially in America here, for the last 20 years, and he's amazing. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt writes, in The Anxious Generation, although the human brain grows to 90% of its full size by age 5, its neural circuitry takes a long time to mature. Our lengthy childhood might be evolution's way of scheduling an extended apprenticeship in social learning through play. The best kind of play is physical, outdoors with other kids, and unsupervised, allowing children to press the limits of their abilities while figuring out how to manage conflict and tolerate pain. But now young people's attention is funneled into devices that take them out of their body, denying them the physical world education they need. Now, I have to say, when I was growing up, our neighborhood was full of kids, and we were always doing something on a neighborhood scale. Frisbee war was a fun one, where literally you'd be on houses in the front yards with a street, which was no man's land in between you, and basically you're just trying to bean each other with Frisbees. I mean, trust me, it was a lot more fun than it might sound. Or we were playing baseball, or we were, I lived on a hill. The neighborhood kids called it Bobby's Hill. And you'd be doing something crazy like, racing big wheels or something down the hill. And then, of course, we had the woods. And we were always in the woods, whether it was playing Army or whatever. I mean, literally chasing each other through the woods. But, I mean, when I was a kid growing up, we were outside all the time. I was in the house more when I got my VCR, but usually that was at night because I worked or I was going to film festivals or doing something during the day. Or working, but we were out, man. We were out and we played and played and played. Nobody was ever in the house. Why would you be? I mean, I was the only time I was in the house was to watch Star Trek, and then on Sundays to watch Sci-Fi Theater on Channel 11 at 2:00 in the afternoon. That was it. Otherwise, I was out to know. Teen anxiety and depression are at near record highs. The latest government survey of high schoolers conducted in 2023 found that more than half of teen girls said they felt persistently sad or hopeless. This data is alarming, but shouldn't be surprising. Young rats and monkeys deprived of play come away socially and emotionally impaired. It would be odd if we, the self-named social animal, were different. Socially underdeveloped childhood leads almost inexorably to socially stunted adulthood. A popular trend on TikTok involves 20-somethings celebrating in creative ways when a friend cancels plans, often because they're too tired or anxious to leave the house. These clips can be goofy and even quite funny. Surely sympathy is due. We all know the feeling of relief when we claw back free time in an overscheduled week. But the sheer number of videos is a bit unsettling. If anybody should feel lonely and desperate for physical world contact, you'd think it would be 20-somethings who are still recovering from years of pandemic cabin fever. But many nights, it seems, members of America's most isolated generation aren't trying to leave the house at all. They're turning on their cameras to advertise to the world the joy of not hanging out. Because when you have porn, why should you try and go find members of the opposite sex and have a good time? I'm telling you, man, it was a driving force in my youth. It's depressing to see that, just rub one out and that's the end of that. But there was so much more fun to be had in the world back in the day, yo. It's so sad. In the 1960s, Erwin Altman, a psychologist at the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland, co-developed a friendship formula characterized by increasing intimacy. In the early stages of friendship, people engage in small talk by sharing trivial details. As they develop trust, their conversations deepen to include more private information until disclosure becomes habitual and easy. Altman later added to an important wrinkle. Friends require boundaries as much as they require closeness. Time alone to recharge is essential for maintaining healthy relationships. And here's a chart, the less social teens. The percentage of 12th graders going out with friends 2 or more times a week. I mean, this to me is shocking. I mean, I have to say, when I was in high school, one of my best friends was a guy named Adam Carl. And Adam Carl was very, very funny. He was always laughing. He always had a smile on his face. And he was really smart. And he had a very quick wit. And Adam and I we made it a point on Sundays to try and go see the worst movie that was playing. I think I've talked about this on the show before. So we would go, whatever movie opened, we would try and go see the worst movie playing, which led us to going to see movies like Ghoulies in the theater. We went and saw Chud in the theater. But sometimes, Chud was actually pretty good. Sometimes we would see movies that we thought that were going to be bad, but they were fucking awesome. Like Night of the Comet. I'm not crazy, I just don't give a fuck. Hey, an e-ticket attraction. Or, perhaps my favorite, Tough Turf. We went and saw these movies thinking they were going to be bad, but we didn't want them. I mean, it was always, fingers crossed. It's like if you're auditioning a role. I saw Patrick Stewart on some clip. I don't know where it was from, but Patrick Stewart was talking about what it's like to audition actors because he's talking about when he was directing, and he said something that is absolutely true. And if you're an aspiring actor, you should know this is true. It's totally true. Every time you walk into a room to audition, everybody in that room wants you to be great. They want you to blow them away. The writer they want you to take what's on that page and make it come to life every time. There was nothing more depressing than trying to cast episodes of Femme Fatales and sitting in a room for like 10 hours a day and seeing actors that didn't do that. Let me just say, we all want you to be good. So, hey, I don't know where that fit into this conversation. But anyway, phones mean that solitude is more crowded than it used to be, and crowds are more solitary. Bright lines once separated being alone and being in a crowd. Nicholas Carr, the author of the new book, Super Bloom, How Technologies of Connection Tear Us Apart, told me, boundaries helped us. You could be present with your friends and reflective in your downtime. Now our social time is haunted by the possibility that something more interesting is happening somewhere else, and our downtime is contaminated by the screams and posts and texts of dozens of friends, colleagues, frenemies, and strangers. If Carr is right, modern technology's always open window to the outside world makes recharging much harder, leaving many people chronically depleted, a walking battery that is always stuck in the red zone. In a healthy world, people who spend lots of time alone would feel that ancient biological cue. I'm alone and sad, and I should make some plans. But we live in a sideways world where easy home entertainment, oversharing online, and stunted social skills spark a strangely popular response. I'm alone, anxious, and exhausted. Thank God my plans were canceled. Last year, the Princeton University sociologist Patrick Sharkey was working on a book about how places shape American lives and economic fortunes. He had a feeling that the rise of remote work might have accelerated a longer-term trend, a shift in the amount of time that people spend inside their home. He ran the numbers and discovered an astounding change in our daily habits, much more extreme than he would have guessed. In 2022, notably after the pandemic had abated, adults spent an additional 99 minutes at home on any given day compared with 2003. This finding formed the basis of a 2024 paper, Homebound, in which Sharkey calculated that, compared with 2003, Americans are more likely to take meetings from home, to shop from home, to be entertained at home, to eat at home, and to even worship at home. Practically the entire economy has reoriented itself to allow Americans to stay within their four walls. This phenomenon cannot be reduced to remote work. It is something far more totalizing, something more like remote life. One might ask, why wouldn't Americans with means want to spend more time at home? In the past few decades, the typical American home has become bigger, more comfortable, and more entertaining. From 1973 to 2023, the size of your average new single-family house increased by 50%, and the share of new single-family houses that have air conditioning doubled to 98%. Streaming services, video game consoles, and flat-screen TVs make the living room more diverting than any 20th century theater or arcade, and yet convenience can indeed be a curse. By Sharkey's calculations, activities at home were associated with strong reduction in self-reported happiness. A homebound life doesn't have to be a solitary life. In the 1970s, the typical household entertained more than once a month. But from the late 1970s to the late 1990s, the frequency of hosting friends for parties, games, dinners, and so on declined by 45%. According to data that Robert Putnam gathered, in the 20 years after Bowling Alone was published, the average amount of time that Americans spent hosting or attending social events declined another 32%. As our homes have become less social, residential architecture has become more anti-social. Clifton Harness is a co-founder of TestFit, a firm that makes software to design layouts for new housing developments. He told me that the cardinal rule of contemporary apartment design is that every room is built to accommodate maximal screen time. In design meetings with developers and architects, you have to assure everybody that there will be space for a wall-mounted flat-screen television in every room, he said. It used to be, let's make sure our rooms have great light. But now when the question is, how do we give the most comfort to the most people, the answer is to feed their screen addiction. Bobby Fajan, a real estate developer, said last year that for the most part, apartments are built for Netflix and chill. From studying floor plans, he noticed that bedrooms, walk-in closets, and other private spaces are growing. I think we're building for aloneness, Fajan told me. Look at here's a chart with time spent at home. I'll leave that up. Let's see what you guys are saying. Back to you. So, Nerd of the Veil. Oh, pardon me, not Nerd. Ned of the Veil. Sorry, Ned of the Veil. I can be antisocial sometimes. Once I hopped on my motorcycle and rode down to Vegas from Canada and met... That was you? And met the fantastic R&B among many other guest people. I had no idea what I was in for, and now I can't wait to go back sometime. Ned of the Veil, I tell people about you all the time. So what Ned of the Veil is referring to is Gary Nerdrotic, Gary Beekler, has these great meetups for his audience. He had one in San Diego, and there's let's call it an imagination connoisseur bar in Vegas. He takes over the bar. He actually buys everybody a couple of tacos and some drinks. He does. He hosts. There were hundreds. I showed up late, and I felt bad. There were hundreds and hundreds of people, and Ned of the Veil, when I met him there, he told me, I was like, dude, where are you from? I think, Ned, if I remember correctly, aren't you from Edmonton? Are you from Edmonton? Am I getting that right? Edmonton? Calgary? Edmonton. I think you were from Edmonton. And he, like you just said, drove all the way down from Canada on his motorcycle. And I was like, bruh, that's so rad. But that's why going out to those, I mean, I think Gary's done a really great job of I have to tell you, if you want to go have a good time, if you ever go to a Nerdrotic meetup, it's all great imagination connoisseurs. I met people there that had flown in from Europe and from Asia. It was a lot of fun. So Ned, good to see you. And I have told the story of you driving down from Canada many a time. So good to see you in the chat. Good to see you. Now back to the article. In 2020, the philosopher and writer Andrew Taggart observed an essay published in the religious journal First Things that a new flavor of masculinity seemed to be emerging, strong, obsessed with personal optimization, and proudly alone. Men and women alike have been delaying family formation. The median age at first marriage for men recently surpassed 30 for the first time in history. Taggart wrote that the men he knew seemed to be foregoing marriage and fatherhood with gusto. Instead of focusing their 30s and 40s on wedding bands and diapers, they were committed to working on their body, their bank account, and their meditation-sharpened minds. Taggart calls these men secular monks for their combination of old-fashioned austerity and modern solipsism. Not solipsism, solipsism. Practitioners submit themselves to ever more rigorous, monitored forms of ascetic self-control, he wrote, among them cold showers, intermittent fasting, data-driven health optimization, and meditation boot camps. When I read Taggart's essay last year, I felt a shock of recognition. In the previous months, I've been captivated by a particular genre of social media, the viral morning routine video. If the protagonist is a man, he is typically handsome and rich. We see him wake up, we see him meditate, we see him write in his journal, we see him exercise, take supplements, take a cold plunge. What is most striking about these videos, however, is the element that they typically lack: other people. In these little movies of a life well spent, the protagonists generally wake up alone and stay that way. We usually see no friends, no spouse, no children. These videos are advertisements for a luxurious form of modern monasticism that treats the presence of other people at best as an unwelcome distraction, and at worst, an unhealthy indulgent that is ideally avoided, like porn, perhaps, or Pop-Tarts. Crazy. Drawing major conclusions about modern masculinity from a handful of TikToks would be unwise. But the solitary man is not just a social media phenomenon. Men spend more time alone than women, and young men are increasing their alone time faster than any other group, according to the American Time Use Survey. Where is this alone time coming from? Liana C. Sayer, a sociologist at the University of Maryland, shared with me her analysis of how leisure time in the 21st century has changed for men and women. Sayer divided leisure into two broad categories: engaged leisure, which includes socializing, going to concerts, and playing sports, and sedentary leisure, which includes watching TV and playing video games. Compared with engaged leisure, which is more likely to be done with other people, sedentary leisure is more commonly done alone. The most dramatic tendency that Sayer uncovered is that single men without kids, who have the most leisure time, are overwhelmingly likely to spend these hours by themselves. And the time they spend in solo sedentary leisure has increased since 2003, more than that of any other group, Sayer tracked. This is unfortunate because, as Sayer wrote, well-being is higher among adults who spend larger shares of leisure with others. Sedentary leisure, by contrast, was associated with negative physical and mental health. Now, I got to chime in. Here. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's videos I've seen online where there's like some woman bitching at some guy, or somebody's complaining about some guy not coming out or not doing something, and then it cuts to a guy in a room like this painting his Warcraft models. I'm like, bro, I relate. I mean, the thing is, it's gotten to the point where I feel that at least what I've noticed, I mean, I'm no longer a young man, and I can't go. I literally, here's an interesting thing. And I know this is true of everybody who's ever lived on planet Earth. You reach a point where you still feel like I talk and feel, I really do. Physically, I feel pretty good. Everything works. I feel like I'm still 22, 23, 24, 25. I feel that I'm that way. But I can't go into a bar and like strike up a conversation with a guy or a girl. I mean, if somebody's alone or they're talking to the bartender or something, it's different. But if you go into a bar where it's pretty active just to get a drink, I can't just talk to people anymore. I'm a weird, creepy old dude if I'm doing that. Like, I feel I still, and it's a problem because me, meaning me, I am unaware that issue exists usually. I'll go in and just start talking to people because I've always talked to people my entire life. And one of my favorite things to do, especially when I travel, was going in, like, I loved going into bars when we were, for instance, working on Lord of the Rings or Chronicles of Narnia, and I was in New Zealand for months at a time. I loved going in and talking to people, going into bars and just chatting. But there's that sweet spot. That was, almost 25 years ago. I was a much younger man. So I could get away with it. Like if you're 30 years old, you can talk to people from like college and then all the way up to like 60. So 30, you can go either way, 30, 35, even to 40. But when you're as old as I am now, you can't go down very far. So, and I'm, it's funny. I a lot of people do come up to me that are younger that are watching this show right now. And if they instigate a conversation, it's fine. It's cool. But I can't go the other way. And it's a really interesting place to be. And as people said to me that, oh, Rob, you could look younger if you like dye your hair. And I'm like, I'm not going to fucking dye my hair. I got nothing to hide. I'm happy to have hair. I mean, so I like that it's kind of gone shocking white. I don't mind it at all. It's kind of cool. But I also am not one of those people, other than I put some stuff for bags under my eyes. I'm not trying to hide. I mean, I'd like to get in better shape. That's going to be since I tore up my 2025 bingo card, I want to lose 50 pounds and get back into that. I'm going to do that 28 days chair challenge and eat a paleo diet, and it's going to be great. But no, I mean, you can't do that anymore. And it's a weird thing to realize that I've had to stop myself. I found myself stopping myself for certain kinds of interactions, just because you have to be hyper aware now of how people perceive you. And that's something that it's just a function of getting old, but it's also something that I don't think of myself like the age I am now. I used to think that's fucking old, man. But another problem is I've liked the same shit since I was a little kid. It hasn't changed, which is problematic because my mind, to a certain extent, hasn't changed much either, for better or for worse. So Richard V. Reeves, the president of the American Institute for Boys and Men, told me that for men as for women, something hard to define is lost when we pursue a life of isolationist comforts. He calls it neededness, the way we make ourselves essential to our families and community. I think at some level we all need to feel like we're a jigsaw piece that's going to fit into a jigsaw somewhere, he said. This neededness can come in several forms: social, economic, or communitarian. Our children and parents can depend on us for care or income. Our colleagues can rely on us to finish a project or to commiserate about an annoying boss. Our religious congregations and weekend poker parties can count on us to fill a pew or bring the dip. But building these bridges to community takes energy, and today's young men do not seem to be constructing these relationships in the same way that they used to. In place of neededness, despair is creeping in. Men who are or underemployed are especially vulnerable. Feeling unneeded is actually, in some cases, literally fatal, Reeves said. If you look at the words that men use to describe themselves before they take their own lives, they are worthless and useless. Since 2001, hundreds of thousands of men have died of drug overdoses, mostly from opioids and synthetics such as fentanyl. If the level of drug poisoning deaths had remained flat since 2001, we'd have had 400,000 fewer men die, Reeves said. These drugs, he emphasized, are defined by their solitary nature. Opioids are not party drugs, but rather the opposite. This is your politics on solitude. All of this time alone, at home, on the phone, is not just affecting us as individuals, it's making society weaker, meaner, and more delusional. By the way, I absolutely 100% agree with this. Mark J. Dunkelman, can you imagine going through life with the last name Dunkelman, Dunkelman? Mr. Dunkelman? I mean no disrespect. Mark J. Dunkelman, an author and a research fellow at Brown University, says that to see how chosen solitude is warping society at large, we must first acknowledge something a little counterintuitive. Today, many of our bonds are actually getting stronger. Parents are spending more time with their children than they did several decades ago, and many couples and families maintain an unbroken flow of communication. My wife and I have texted 10 times since we said goodbye today, Dunkelman told me, when I reached him at noon on a weekday. When my 10-year-old daughter buys a Butterfinger at CVS, I get a phone notification about it. At the same time, messaging apps, TikTok streams, and subreddits keep us plugged into the thoughts and opinions of the global crowd that shares our interests. When I watch a Cincinnati Bengals football game, I'm on a group text with beat reporters to whom I can ask questions, and they'll respond, Dunkelman said. I can follow the live thoughts of football analysts on X.com so that I'm practically watching the game over their shoulder. I live in Rhode Island, and those are connections that could have never existed 30 years ago. Home-based, phone-based culture has arguably solidified our closest and most distant connections, the inner ring of family and best friends bound by blood and intimacy, and the outer ring of the tribe linked by shared affinities. But it's wreaking havoc on the middle ring of familiar but not intimate relationships with the people who live around us, which Dunkelman calls the village. These are your neighbors, the people in your town, he said. We used to know them well. Now we don't. I got to tell you something. You're going to think I'm probably insane. So I go to our local Albertsons like all the time, sometimes once a day, whether it's to pick up dog food, dog treats, or whatever. So I kind of know all the people that like work at the Albertsons. And I was there last night, and there wasn't a lot of people there. And I was talking to some of the people there, and I'm like, it looks like it'd be pretty fun to work here, just from a social standpoint. Like, it's a neighborhood grocery store where everybody, I mean, I know half the checkers there. They know what I'm going to buy. I've been going in there for years now. And I'm like, I swear to God, I was thinking, I wonder, and I literally asked, I said, how difficult is it to get a job here, like a part-time job here? And they were like, it's not that hard. And I honestly thought about it, and I'm still, believe it or not, thinking about it. Just to be around people. And I was thinking of, like, not necessarily to need the money, although, you know, more money means more action figures. but no, in all seriousness, I was actually thinking about it. I still, like, if I could get a job, if I could work like 20 hours a week at the local grocery store, I think that'd be pretty fun. You know, I'd even work like, I mean, I don't know if I could work 7 days a week, but why not? I mean, just to hear people talking, seeing what the zeitgeist is, what's going on a daily basis. Because I always worked in video stores, but I started at 13, and there was a whole community of customers. I was working in retail. I loved it. From 1980 to 1988, until I moved to California, I worked in video stores. Before there were any video stores, I was working at the second video store in the United States, and it was awesome. And I don't know, is that crazy? People are like, you want to go work at your local grocery store? Why not? I mean, I don't go out and party anymore, and I live far away from most of my friends. I think it'd be kind of fun. I know that might seem crazy, but to me, it appeals to me. I mean, that idea appeals to me because I'm always in there anyway. And half the people I know, I'm like, hey, what's up? And what's really interesting is what fascinates me about my local grocery store is it's the grocery store, in terms of the people who work there, it's like separated into separate countries. Like, you walk in and you could I don't think of each aisle as a separate country, but, you know, there's one section of the store where all the meat and fish and the vegetables and the fruits and vegetables are, you know, and then the other side's where the pharmacy is. So there's an entire realm. You guys are probably thinking I'm out of my mind. How much have you had to drink tonight? Not much. I mean, look, I've barely touched this. I don't know. I think it'd be fun. The middle ring is the key to social cohesion. Dunkelman the middle ring is the key to social cohesion, Dunkelman said. Families teach us love and tribes teach us loyalty. The village teaches us tolerance. Imagine that a local parent disagrees with you about affirmative action at a PTA meeting. Online, you might write him off as a political opponent who deserves your scorn. But in a school gym full of neighbors, you bite your tongue. This is really important. As the year rolls on, you discover that your daughters are in the same dance class. At a pickup, you swap stories about caring for aging relatives. Although your differences don't disappear, they're folded into peaceful coexistence. And when the two of you sign up for a committee to draft a diversity statement for the school, you find that you can accommodate each other's opposing views. This is so important. It is politically moderating to meet thoughtful people in the real world who disagree with you, Dunkelman said. I just fell in love with Dunkelman. Dunkelman is absolutely right. Let me read that again. It is politically moderating to meet thoughtful people in the real world who disagree with you, Dunkelman said. But if PTA meetings are still frequently held in person, many other opportunities to meet and understand one's neighbors are becoming a thing of the past. An important implication of the death of the middle ring is that if you have no appreciation for why the other side has their narrative, you'll want your own side to fight them without compromise. I cannot tell you how much I agree with that statement. Since I've been on YouTube, by the way, April, I have to find out what the exact date is. April will mark my 10th anniversary on this platform. It is hard to believe that 10 years ago, the late, great John Schnepp called me up one day and said he wanted me to come on this new show called AMC Heroes. And that was the very first time I met John Campea. And 10 years ago, I mean, that seems wild to me that I've been on YouTube for 10 years. And I've been a pundit since 2018 on my own channel. Wild. But what I've learned, I mean, depending on which channels I go on, I got a lot of blowback from people like, how can you go on this person's channel? And I'm like, but my whole life I've talked to all kinds of people. I mean, I've traveled around the world. I've met all different kinds of folks. And I love talking to people. People that disagree with me, I figure, you know what? We might vehemently disagree with one another, but I like talking to other people because I learn. That's how I learn. And if I learn more about them and more sympathetic to their beliefs, or my own beliefs get reinforced talking to some douchebag. But if you can talk to people, and I have to say, a lot of the people who've criticized me for going on to various YouTube channels, I have never been treated badly ever on a YouTube channel. As a matter of fact, one of my members, a guy who lives in Sweden, who ended up, we were very friendly. He was a big fan of mine until he's a Muslim. He lives in Sweden, and he did not appreciate my stance on Israel, that I was a staunch Zionist and a big supporter of Israel, and he hated my guts. But you know what? Then he and a friend of his, a very articulate, very smart, thoughtful guy, they asked me if I would come on, which I respect the hell out of, because they asked me if I would go on their channel and have a discussion. And I did. Now, we still disagreed with one another, vehemently disagreed, but we had a great conversation, and I felt that they had good points to make, and I feel that I was also heard. And we could be totally on opposite sides of the issue, but we were able to sit down and have a conversation. You know, they challenged me at first. They said, would you do this? And I go, of course I'll do this. And it's interesting to me to see how many people will yell and scream and bitch and moan on social media. And there have been people that have come after me, and I've said, you know what? I've said I have a YouTube show. You can come on my show whenever you want, present your alternative point of view. You can come after me if you hate what I'm saying or hate what I believe. Please come on the show. I've made that offer. Do you know how many people have taken me up on it? Zero. Some people have wanted to come on and talk about movies. I'm not talking about movies. I'm talking about people that hate my guts or think, you know, my position on what's going on in the Middle East or something is absolutely wrong, or politically or something like that. They won't come on to the show. And I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? We could have a very interesting conversation. Why do you not want to do that? Well, it's because I think a lot of people, like, I'm not scared of talking to anybody. I'll talk to anybody. And I'm no great thinker. I'm no great philosopher. I'm the everyman. You know, I mean, I think so. So I just look at an opportunity to learn something about something I don't know much about. So come on and teach me. Let's have a conversation about it. Zero. Anyway, and I think that's definitely a problem. I think part of this isolation, what it's doing, and by design, by the way, you're much more malleable if all you're doing is reading and with algorithms just feeding you what you want to hear. It's really dangerous, and it's a very easy way. If you want to radicalize a population very quickly, social media is the way to do it. We're all getting played every day. I mean, and it's frustrating because you can see it happening. And because no one's getting out and talking to one another. Because it's a lot harder when you're standing right in front of somebody to, you know, actively, although I would say we are being programmed to be vicious and mean even in front of somebody else. And that's distressing. The village is our best arena for practicing productive disagreement and compromise. In other words, democracy. So it's no surprise that the erosion of the village has coincided with the emergence of a grotesque style of politics in which every election feels like an existential quest to vanquish an intramural enemy. For the past 5 decades, the American National Election Studies surveys have asked Democrats and Republicans to rate the opposing party on a feeling thermometer that ranges from 0, very cold or unfavorable, to 100, very warm and favorable. In 2000, just 8% of partisans gave the other party a 0. By 2020, that figure had shot up to 40%. In a 2021 poll by Generation Lab Axios, nearly a third of college students who identify as Republican said they wouldn't even go on a date with a Democrat. And more than 2/3 of Democratic students said the same for members of the GOP. Donald Trump's victory in the 2024 presidential election had many causes, including inflation and frustration with Joe Biden's leadership. But one source of Trump's success may be that he is an avatar of the all-tribe, no-village style of performative confrontation. He stokes out-group animosity and speaks to voters who are furiously intolerant of political difference. To cite just a few examples from the campaign, Trump called Democrats enemies of democracy and the news media enemies of the people, and promised to root out the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country that lie and steal and cheat on elections. Social disconnection also helps explain progressives' stubborn inability to understand Trump's appeal. In the fall, one popular Democratic lawn sign read, "Harris Waltz, obviously." That sentiment, rejected by a majority of voters, indicates a failure to engage with the world as it really is. Dunkelman emailed me after the election to lament Democratic cluelessness. How did those of us who live in elite circles not see how Trump was gaining popularity even among our literal neighbors, he wrote. Too many progressives were mainlining left-wing media in the privacy of their home, oblivious that families down the street were drifting to the right. Even in the highly progressive borough of Brooklyn, New York, 3 in 10 voters chose Trump. If progressives still consider MAGA an alien movement, it is in part because they have made themselves strangers in their own land. See, that's a reference to Robert Heinlein's book title, Stranger in a Strange Land. I know that's a term that's not unique to that book, but that's the way I knew it. Practicing politics alone on the internet rather than in community isn't only making us more likely to demonize and alienate our opponents, though that would be bad enough, it may also be encouraging deep nihilism. In 2018, a group of researchers led by Michael Bang-Petersen, a Danish political scientist, began asking Americans to evaluate false rumors about Democratic and Republican politicians, including Trump and Hillary Clinton. We were expecting a clear pattern of polarization, Peterson told me, with people on the left sharing conspiracies about the right and vice versa. But some participants seemed drawn to any conspiracy theory so long as it was intended to destroy the established order. Members of this cohort commonly harbored racial or economic grievances. Perhaps more important, Peterson said, they tended to feel socially isolated. These aggrieved loners agreed with many dark pronouncements, such as, "I need chaos around me," and "when I think about our political and social institutions, I cannot help but think, just let them burn." Peterson and his colleagues coined a term to describe this cohort's motivation, the need for chaos. Let's see what you guys are saying. The need for chaos. Some men just want to watch the world burn. Paul Allan Bernotto says, I used to work at Whole Foods in Brentwood in the 2010s and Gelson's in Pacific Palisades before that, and before that as a dairy grocery clerk in Checker, and now that place is gone. I'm sorry. Drink more, Bobby. Thomas Logan says, drink more, Bobby. Oh, okay. And tell us your experience with Lost Highway. You were 29 when it opened to 2 thumbs down. Give us your thoughts and review. I loved Lost Highway when I saw it. As a matter of fact, I think it's Does it have easy answers? No, but I'm a David Lynch fan. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I love the casting of it. Robert Blake, I love seeing that clip of Robert Blake when Robert Blake asks the President of the United States, asks Bill Pullman to call him at his own house. It's one of the great clips. But I'll tell you the real thing about Lost Highway. So I love Lost Highway, and my friend Orion Walker, whose parents I've known for years and years. Orion Walker, who's now he's a very accomplished writer of video games. Orion Walker is a huge fan of David Lynch and Louis Buñuel, and especially of Lost Highway. And after I made Free Enterprise, they asked me to edit. Orion asked me to edit his, like me, first and only feature film called Dean Quixote. And the whole movie is a reference to, I mean, even his production company name is Large Door Productions, but that was a Buñuel thing. But the movie is basically it's an homage. The way Free Enterprise is to Star Trek, Dean Quixote is to Lost Highway. Swear to God. And so I worked on this movie for a year, and maybe I've talked about this before. So this movie, I worked on it for a year, and I'm really proud of it. It was about a kid in college who's graduating, and he wants to be an artist, and he's looking for an artistic mission. And it shared a little bit of DNA with Free Enterprise. Well, in it is the movie, or in it is the band Guided by Voices. And Orion loved Guided by Voices. Robert Pollard, the lead singer, is like his Shatner. And they performed 3 songs in the movie. So keep in mind, when you edit a movie, that's a year of my life. Okay, I edited this movie for a year of my life, and you want people to see your work. It is the first of 2 movies that I've worked on. Actually, I've worked on a lot of movies that are very little seen, if ever. This particular movie, because for whatever reason, the band was flown out, put up, they were performed in the movie, but the contracts, they only had like festival rights or something. It was a very weird rights deal. The Guided by Voices management, and I recently tried to contact their management, and I wrote them and said who I was. I was the editor of this movie. It's been literally been sitting on a shelf for 24 years, now 25 years. It's a movie I edited 25 years ago, year of my life. It's a really good little movie. It's a David Lynch homage that the time is now, 25 years later. It's a great period piece of the year 2000, 99, 2000. And I think when I was watching that movie, I must have watched Lost Highway like 20 times over and over and over again. And it's been sitting on a shelf. And I would love to see people be able to see it. First, it's got a great indie soundtrack. The songs of the day, or the music is great. Plus, Guided by Voices is actually in it. So if anybody out there watching this knows Guided by Voices, please have them get in touch with me, because I would love to facilitate getting Dean Quixote released. You know, it wasn't that expensive. It's definitely a time capsule, but especially on David Lynch's death, I thought a lot about this movie that I worked on that was totally inspired, not just by his work, but specifically by Lost Highway. Played Out says, think of how stupid the average person is and realize half of them are stupider than that. George Carlin. But is that right? You know, that's too easy. I like people. Ned of the Vale says, I can be antisocial sometimes. That's what he said. But Ned of the Vale says, you're correct, Rob. I'm so very humbled that you remember me. If I do get to meet you again, it would be an honor to buy you a drink and pick your brain as a major movie guy myself. Cheers, my friend. Well, cheers to you, Ned of the Vale. But you didn't tell me, was it Edmonton? Was I right about that? Oh, yeah, I was. You said you were correct, Rob. Okay, that's what you mean. Yes. Here's to Edmonton. By the way, Free Enterprise, my film, I had one of my greatest film-going experiences ever in Edmonton, because Free Enterprise was on a double bill with The Americanization of Emily, directed by Arthur Hiller. And Arthur Hiller was at the screening at the Edmonton. There was a film festival in Canada that was split into 2. It was called the Local Heroes Festival, and it was in Edmonton and Winnipeg. And so we went to Edmonton first, and our screening went so well that they invited us to go to Winnipeg in like February. It was awesome. It made me want to go make a horror movie in the dead of winter in Winnipeg. Love to do that. It's so cold up there. When the snow blows across there's like no water in the snow, so the snow is like granular, like sand on a beach, but it's light, so it blows across. It's awesome. Anyway, I don't know. But anyway, that was great. I met Arthur Hiller. It was awesome. Played Out says, think of how, oh yeah, I guess I caught up. I'm caught up. Now I'll continue on with the article. This is a long rambling episode of Robservations, but as long as you guys are having a good time, you're sticking with me, I'll keep going. Although chaotically inclined individuals score highly in popular measure for loneliness, they don't seem to seek the obvious remedy. What they're reaching out to get isn't friendship at all, but rather recognition and status, Peterson said. For many socially isolated men in particular, for whom reality consists primarily of glowing screens and empty rooms, a vote for destruction is a politics of last resort, a way to leave one's mark on the world where collective progress or collective support of any kind feels impossible. The introversion delusion. Let us be fair to solitude for a moment. As the father of a young child, I know well that a quiet night alone can be a balm. I have spent evenings alone at a bar, watching a baseball game that felt ecstatically close to heaven. People cope with stress and grief and mundane disappointment in complex ways, and sometimes isolation is the best way to restore inner equilibrium. But the dosage matters. A night alone away from a crying baby is one thing. A decade or more of chronic social disconnection is something else entirely. And people who spend more time alone year after year become meaningfully less happy. In his 2023 paper on the rise of 21st century solitude, Adelaide at the Philadelphia Fed calculated that by one measure, sociability means considerably more for happiness than money does. A 5 percentage point increase in alone time that was associated with about the same decline in life satisfaction as was a 10% lower household income. Nonetheless, many people keep choosing to spend free time alone, in their home, away from other people. Perhaps one might think they're making the right choice. After all, they must know themselves best. But a consistent finding of modern psychology is that people often don't know what they want or what will make them happy. The saying that predictions are hard, especially about the future, applies with special weight to predictions about our own life. Time and again, what we expect to bring us peace, a bigger house, a luxury car, a job with twice the pay but half the leisure, only creates more anxiety. And the top of this pile of things we mistakenly believe we want, there is aloneness. Several years ago, Nick Epley, a psychologist at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, asked commuter train passengers to make a prediction. How would they feel if asked to spend the ride talking with a stranger? Most participants predicted that quiet solitude would make for a better commute than having a long chat with someone they didn't know. Then Epley's team created an experiment in which some people were asked to keep to themselves, while others were instructed to talk with a stranger. The longer the conversation, the better, participants were told. Afterward, people filled out a questionnaire. How did they feel? Despite the broad assumption that the best commute is a silent one, the people instructed to talk with strangers actually reported feeling significantly more positive than those who'd kept to themselves. A fundamental paradox at the core of human life is that we are highly social and made better in every way by being around people, Epley said. And yet, over and over and over, we have opportunities to connect that we don't take or even actively reject. And it is a terrible mistake. If I can interject here, as someone who in the early aughts of 2000, I traveled a lot. And one of my favorite things traveling was talking to people. I mean, I had great conversations for hours with people on planes. And, again, the position should always be, when you first start talking to a stranger, to ask questions. Don't talk about yourself. If you're asked questions, answer them. But for the most part, ask people questions. That's what gets them engaged in the conversation. And when you ask a question, you have to listen. You have to follow it up. If somebody asks, if you ask somebody a question and they answer it, ask for more detail. Get them talking to you. It's an easy tactic, and you have to really listen. You have to listen to what they say and key on certain things, the things that interest you the most about what they've said. Follow up with a question about those things to keep yourself interested in the conversation. Man, air travel goes by so quickly when you get in conversations with people, intense conversations. I totally agree with the assessment of this article. Researchers have repeatedly validated Epley's discovery. In 2020, the psychologists Seth Margolis and Sonia Lubomirsky at UC Riverside, that's right around the corner, asked people to behave like an extrovert for 1 week and like an introvert for another. Subjects received several reminders to act assertive and spontaneous or quiet and reserved, depending on the week's theme. Participants said they felt more positive emotions at the end of the extroversion week and more negative emotions at the end of the introversion week. Our modern economy, with its home delivery conveniences, manipulates people into behaving like agoraphobes. But it turns out that we can be manipulated in the opposite direction, and we might feel happier for it. Our mistaken preference for solitude could emerge from a misplaced anxiety that other people aren't that interested in talking with us, or that they would find our company bothersome. But in reality, Epley told me, social interaction is not very uncertain because of the principle of reciprocity. If you say hello to someone, they'll typically say hello back. If you give somebody a compliment, they'll typically thank you. Many people, it seems, are not social enough for their own good. They too often seek comfort in solitude when they would actually find joy in connection. Despite a consumer economy that seems optimized for introverted behavior, we would have happier days, years, and lives if we resisted the undertow of the convenience curse, if we talked with more strangers, belonged to more groups, and left the house for more activities. The antisocial century has been bad enough. More anxiety and depression, more need for chaos in our politics. But I'm sorry to say that our collective detachment could still get worse. Or, to be more precise, weirder. In May of last year, 3 companies of OpenAI, the artificial intelligence company, sat on stage to introduce ChatGPT's new real-time conversational speech feature. A research scientist named Mark Chen held up a phone and, smiling, started speaking to it. "Hey, ChatGPT, I'm Mark. How are you?" Mark said. "Hello, Mark," a cheery female voice responded. "Hey, so I'm on stage right now," Mark said. "I'm doing a live demo, and frankly, I'm feeling a bit nervous. Can you help me calm my nerves a little bit?" "Oh, are you doing a live demo right now?" the voice replied, projecting astonishment with eerie verisimilitude. "That's awesome. Just take a deep breath and remember, you're the expert here." Mark asked for feedback on his breathing before panting loudly, like someone who just finished a marathon. "Whoa, slow," the voice responded. "Mark, you're not a vacuum cleaner." Out of frame, the audience laughed. Mark tried breathing audibly again, this time more slowly and deliberately. "That's it," the AI responded. "How do you feel?" "I feel a lot better," Mark said. "Thank you so much." AI's ability to speak naturally might seem like an incremental update, as subtle as a camera lens refinement on a new iPhone, but according to Nick Epley, fluent speech represents a radical advancement in the technology's ability to encroach on human relationships. "Once an AI can speak to you, it'll feel extremely real," he said, because people process spoken word more intimately and emotionally than they process text. For a study published in 2020, Epley and Amit Kumar, a psychologist at the University of Texas at Austin, randomly assigned participants to contact an old friend via phone or email. Most people said they preferred to send a written message, but those instructed to talk on the phone reported feeling a significantly stronger bond with their friend and a stronger sense that they'd really connected than those who used email. Speech is rich with what are known as paralinguistic cues, such as emphasis and intonation, which can build sympathy and trust in the minds of listeners. In another study, Epley and the behavioral scientist Juliana Schroeder found that employers and potential recruiters were more likely to rate candidates as more competent, thoughtful, and intelligent when they heard a "why I'm right for this job" pitch rather than read it. Even now, before AI has mastered fluent speech, millions of people are already forming intimate relationships with machines, according to Jason Fagon, a journalist who is writing a book about the emergence of AI companions. Character AI, the most popular platform for AI companions, has tens of millions of monthly users who spend an average of 93 minutes a day chatting with their AI friend. No one is getting duped into thinking they're actually talking to humans, Fagon told me. People are freely choosing to enter relationships with artificial partners, and they're getting deeply attached anyway because of the emotional capabilities of these systems. One subject in his book is a young man who, after his fiance's death, engineers an AI chatbot to resemble his deceased partner. Another is a bisexual mother who supplements her marriage to a man with an AI that identifies as a woman. If you find the notion of emotional intercourse with an immaterial entity creepy, consider the many friends and family members who exist in your life mainly as words on a screen. Digital communication has already prepared us for AI companionship, Fagon said, by transforming many of our physical world relationships into a sequence of text chimes and blue bubbles. I think part of why AI companion apps have proven so seductive so quickly is that most of our relationships already happen exclusively through the phone, he said. Epley sees the exponential growth of AI companions as a real possibility. You set them up to never criticize you, never cheat on you, never have a bad day and insult you, and to always be interested in you. Unlike the most patient spouses, they could tell us that we're always right. Unlike the world's best friend, they could instantly respond to our own needs without the all-too-human distraction of having to lead their own life. The horrifying part, of course, is that learning how to interact with real human beings who can disagree with you and disappoint you is essential to living in the real world, Epley said. I think he's right. But Epley was born in the 1970s, and I was born in the 80s. People born in the 2010s or the 2020s might not agree with us about the irreplaceability of real human friends. These generations may discover that what they want most from their relationships is not a set of people who might challenge them, but rather a set of feelings, sympathy, humor, validation that can be more reliably drawn out from silicon than from carbon-based life forms. Long before technologies built a super-intelligent machine that can do the work of so many Einsteins, they may build an emotionally sophisticated one that can do the work of so many friends. Now, this makes me think about college. So I went to before the student uprising, I went to the Evergreen State College, and we had what are called coordinated studies programs there. It wasn't like normal classes. And we had like 4 professors. And the coordinated studies program that I was in my first year of college, the first semester, first 2 quarters, I guess, was it was called the Making of Meaning. And, it was kind of on one end, very evergreen. At Evergreen, you didn't get grades, traditional grades. You had evaluations. So you were based, it would be you in a room with a professor and 15 students, and you'd seminar for 4 hours based on the reading. So you really got to know people, and you got to know your professors and different points of view, and it was great. But one of the things that always struck me about that was the making of meaning about how, look, I love Star Trek. Or I used to love Sandman. I don't think I can ever not love it. But all the things that I love, a lot of people could give a shit about. So those things have no meaning. Like when I talk to people who don't, they're casually interested in Star Trek. They're casually interested in Star Wars, or they're casually interested in whatever. They appreciate, they're like, oh, I'm happy you like that. But they literally have the connection that I spent my life creating between me and the media that I love. They don't have that connection at all. It means nothing to them. They can sit down and watch any episode of Star Trek and be mildly diverted by it, but they don't know the difference between a great episode of Star Trek. I think inherently they know if a story's good or it grabs them, but they wouldn't understand why I get so angry. Like, what's wrong with Star Trek 09? It's fine. It's a lot of fun. It's zip zap. Carl Urban's great as Dr. McCoy. What's your problem? And they would be right. Because they don't have any kind of connection to it. They have no ability to see what's good or what's bad. They know they liked it. And in a way, I would say that, well, if they liked it, then the movie succeeded for them. It doesn't succeed for me, but the movie is not supposed to succeed for me. It's supposed to succeed for them. It was supposed to bring in a whole new generation of Star Trek. It didn't. Some people like it, but the reason it didn't is because it didn't resonate beyond, once the movie's off the screen, it's like it left no impression on even the people that it was supposed to. There's nothing about it that makes people go, oh, I want to be like that guy, which it didn't. So I won't get into that, but we all make our own meaning, you know, and I think that's true of a lot of things. I mean, there are some things that I think we're hardwired, like when we see a baby, for instance, or a sunset, or things that have a certain, it's evolutionary, and it goes back into our, you know, millions of years of evolution and biology. But, you know, we make our own meaning, and I think that's quite important. And I can see what the fact that human-made things has been important up to a certain point in our future, and in our AI future. What is it going to matter if you're going to interact with a chatbot that can make you feel good? Does that matter? You know, you watch the movie Her, which is probably going to wind up being the most prophetic science fiction movie ever made. I love Her. And as I've talked a lot about on this show, the revelation when he asks how many people are you talking to in that movie is fucking devastating, because you realize it was Spike Jonze. That was a brilliant, Her is a brilliant movie. And when people ask me, like, you know, what are your top 5 favorite science fiction movies of the 2000s? I mean, Her is definitely there. Children of Men is there. Ex Machina, Gattaca, but I think that came out the last. You know, it's the same list that you have. Anara. All that stuff, but Her is probably the most prophetic. And the thing is, if you are getting something out of it, and I keep thinking about, you know, I think a lot about Peter Watts's book Blindsight. If you guys want to read some really provocative, tough, hard science fiction, again, I've said it a million times, but read Peter Watts's book Blindsight. And in Blindsight, it takes place in like the 2080s. But the main character is having a conversation with this female character that he meets, and she is surprised, like nobody has sex with other human beings, you know, because, and I think what's interesting about that, bringing up that subject, you know, like to me, one of my turn-ons is to participate in somebody else's fantasy, like what gets them off. If I can, and I think that give and take is what's exciting. I think a lot of guys just want to do what they want to do, and they're not so keen or whatever or any partner, guys, girls, whatever your thing is. But when you're with another person, it's that give and take. And what turns me on is to get into somebody's imagination. What does somebody fantasize about? And if you can participate in that and fulfill that fantasy, and I'm not talking about dressing up as a furry, if that's what you want to do, that to me, you get apart from. I'm talking about getting up close and personal with somebody, you know, and that. But again, some people don't care. Are you going to care about that? Because if you just want the physiological release, will it matter? Like, are we just going to which to me seems so. It's so depressing that we're even being in the area of intimacy, we're being pushed away from one another, and we just, rather than just get that physiological release. What about making out with somebody for like 4 hours and exploring every nook and cranny of their body with your fingers and tongue and all that? What's going to happen to our society when that's gone too? It's already gone away for a lot of young people. It was a driving force in my young life. It's gone. Well, what happens when there's no intimacy left? And if you can have intimacy with a machine, does it matter? I mean, does it matter? If it makes you happy and it's less muss and fuss, that's going to be really interesting. But this article is almost finished. The antisocial century is as much a result of what's happened to the exterior world of concrete and steel as it is about advances inside our phones. The decline of government investments in what Eric Kleinberg calls social infrastructure, public spaces that shape our relationship to the world, may have begun in the latter part of the 20th century, but it has continued in the 21st. That has arguably affected nearly everyone, but less advantaged Americans most of all. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to poor neighborhoods in big cities, and the community leaders tell me the real crisis for poor teenagers is that there's just not much for them to do anymore, and nowhere to go, Kleinberg told me. I'd like to see the government build social infrastructure for teenagers with the creativity and generosity with which video game companies build the toys that keep them inside. I'm thinking of athletic fields and public swimming pools and libraries with beautiful social areas for young people to hang out together. Improved public social infrastructure would not solve all the problems of the antisocial century, but degraded public spaces and degraded public life are in some ways the other side of all of our investments in video games and phones and bigger, better private space. Just as we need time to see the invisible emissions of the Industrial Revolution, we are only now coming to grips with the negative externalities of a phone-bound and home-bound world. The media theorist Marshall McLuhan once said of technology that every augmentation is also an amputation. We chose our digitally enhanced world. We did not realize the significance of what was being amputated. But we can choose differently. In the 2015 novel Seven Eves, Neil Stephenson coined the term amistics. The term amistics to describe the practice of carefully selecting which technologies to accept. The word is a reference to the Amish. Amistics. I guess it's amistics, who generally shun many modern innovations, including cars and television. Although they are sometimes considered strictly anti-modern, many Amish communities have refrigerators and washing machines, and some use solar power. Instead of dismissing all technology, the Amish adopt only those innovations that support their religious and communal values. In his 1998 dissertation on one Amish community, Tay Kong Tan, then a PhD candidate at Harvard, quoted a community member as saying that they didn't want to adopt TV or radio because these products would destroy our visiting practices. We would stay at home with the television or radio rather than meet with other people. If the Amish approach to technology is radical in its application, it recognizes something plain and true. Although technology does not have values of its own, its adoption can create values, even in the absence of a coordinated effort. For decades, we've adopted whatever technologies removed friction and increased dopamine, embracing what makes life feel easy and good in the moment. But dopamine is a chemical, not a virtue. And what's easy is not always what's best for us. We should ask ourselves, what would it mean to select technology based on long-term health rather than instant gratification? And if technology is hurting our community, what can we do to heal it? A seemingly straightforward prescription is that teenagers should choose to spend less time on their phone, and their parents should choose to invite more friends over for dinner. But in a way, these are collective action problems. A teenager is more likely to get out of the house if his classmates have already made a habit of hanging out. That teen's parents are more likely to host if their neighbors have also made a habit of weekly gatherings. There is a word for such deeply etched communal habits: rituals. And one reason, perhaps, that the declining of socializing is synchronized with the decline of religion is that nothing has proved as adept as inscribing ritual into our calendars as faith. I have a view that is uncommon among social scientists, which is that moral revolutions are real and they change our culture, Robert Putnam told me. In the early 20th century, a group of liberal Christians, including the pastor Walter Rauschenbusch, urged other Christians to expand their faith from a narrow concern for personal salvation to a public concern for justice. Their movement, which became known as the social gospel, was instrumental in passing major political reforms, such as the abolition of child labor. It also encouraged a more communitarian approach to American life, which manifested in an array of entirely secular congregations that met in union halls and community centers and dining rooms. All of this came out of a particular alchemy of writing and thinking and organizing. No one can say precisely how to change a nation's moral, emotional atmosphere, but what's certain is that atmospheres do change. Our smallest actions create norms. Our norms create values. Our values drive behavior, and our behaviors cascade. The antisocial century is the result of one such cascade, of chosen solitude accelerated by digital world progress and physical world regress. But if one's cascade brought us into an antisocial century, another can bring about a social century. New norms are possible. They're being created all the time. Independent bookstores are booming. The American Booksellers Association has reported more than 50% growth since 2009. And in cities such as New York City and Washington, D.C., many of them have become miniature theaters, with regular standing room-only crowds gathered for author readings. More districts and states are banning smartphones in schools, a national experiment that could, optimistically, improve children's focus and their physical world relationships. In the past few years, board game cafes have flowered across the country, and their business is expected to nearly double by 2030. These cafes buck an 80-year trend. Instead of turning a previously social form of entertainment into a private one, they turn a living room pastime into a destination activity. As sweeping as the social revolution I've described might seem, it's built from the ground up by institutions and decisions that are profoundly within our control. As humble as a cafe, as small as a new phone locker at school. When Epley and his lab asked Chicagoans to overcome their preference for solitude and talk with strangers on a train, the experiment probably didn't change anyone's life. All it did was marginally improve the experiences of one 15-minute block of time. But life is just one long set of 15-minute blocks, one after another. The way we spend our minutes is the way we spend our decades. No amount of research that I've done has changed my life more than this, Epley told me. It's not that I'm never lonely. It's that my moment-to-moment experience of life is better, because I've learned to take the dead space of life and make friends in it. That article, once again, The Antisocial Century, is in the February issue of The Atlantic. You can find it online, and I put the link in the description. So, yes, I read that entire article. It was a long article, but I think it's worth sharing, and I think it's worth reading. I also think it's worth considering. That was actually by Derek Thompson, and the illustrations were by Max Guther. And I know there's somebody out there going, The Atlantic is far left trash. Look, it's a good article, and I think that definitely worth sharing. Thomas Logan says, call Dave Parker, Bobby. We need his Lost Highway analysis. Well, Thomas, Dave Parker will be on Midnight Metal with me tomorrow at 9 p.m. So join us, join us, as the Evil Dead would say, and meet Dave Parker. Tomorrow, Gio Diaz sends in a $20 super chat and says about Neil Gaiman, a life lesson I had to accept myself was that sociopaths and psychopaths by nature have a deep understanding of psychology. Some of them use that to create art and manipulate. All predators are beautiful. I guess you're right. I mean, look, to me, the problem is his work so profoundly affected me, and I would have thought that I mean, what was described in those it's just, look, it's weird for me. I don't understand the idea of wanting to impose your physical needs on somebody without wanting them to return that. You know, it's alien to me. I mean, I understand it. It's more of I think a predatorial thing, like you were just saying. Like, but I just can't imagine you would violate the sanctity of somebody else's person, because it's you know, especially sexually, because you're in your. I think that sexual degradation is some of the worst thing you can do to another human being, aside from taking their life, because it's all about you. It's the most dehumanizing. You are literally dehumanizing another person and turning them into something that only serves your carnal desires. And I think there's, aside from taking somebody's life, sexual violence is probably the worst possible thing you can do to another human being. And I abhor it. And I you know, that's what was described, the acts that were described. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that somebody who seemed to be so empathetic, that it was just, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Apocalypse Cow says, hypothetical, you're in your prime. I'm always in my prime. It's date night at your place. Your date hasn't seen a true erotic film but wants to. You can only pick one. Which one would you pick? Ooh, that's a great question. Now, here's the thing. One person's erotica is another person's pornography. So, I think that I would have to understand, like, look, here's the problem, and we've talked about this a lot on this channel. Now that you can get pornography for free at whatever keystroke, the idea of eroticism has almost been completely eliminated. I mean, the whole point of enjoying someone, to be with somebody that you have a great sexual connection with, you can spend hours pleasuring each other. Hours. Not just minutes. And especially for guys, I mean, the preamble, the lead up to the act, you know, and spending time. If you're really into a woman, her whole body is a work of art. You know, you can just gaze at a woman, her walking across a room before you even have touched her. I mean, but it's a mindset. It's a thing. You have to be interested in that. I find women's bodies to be art. You know, truly. And if they are going to share that with you in every way, shape, or form, I want to spend my time. I'm in no hurry to get where I know I'm going to get where I'm going to go, one way or another. So why be in any hurry to get there? Hence, I practice my ladies first philosophy. So I would have to find out in terms of I think it's important to understand other people. Like, you got to go slow. But I'll tell you what movie that I would pick. But now I'm going to say this and you all are going to laugh your fucking ass at me. You're going to laugh at me. But see, the thing is, and I don't know now because how eroticism has changed with the look, here's what I would say. Two Moon Junction. Now, Two Moon Junction was a great, with Richard Tyson and Sherilyn Fenn, you know, were directed by the great Zalman King, written by his wife Patricia Louise Knopp. So here's the thing about Two Moon Junction. It's kind of like a romance novel. Richard Tyson is this beautiful, strapping man. There's a woman in the South who's getting married to a scion of society, and he's a really handsome kid. And she's really beautiful, and Louise Fletcher is her grandmother, and Burl Ives is in this movie. These two families are going to unite, so it's totally a Southern potboiler romance novel. But then Richard Tyson literally works for a carnival. He's a hunka burnin' love. Buddy Revell from 3 O'Clock High, or the villain in Kindergarten Cop, don't bring up Battlefield Earth. But I love Richard Tyson. He's rad. I played pool with him one night, and I was telling him, you were the fucking man, Tuma Junction. And they develop this, they have a torrid affair, which is going to be detrimental to the family. And the grandmother finds out, and she's basically like, have your fun, but you still have to get married. But it's really erotic. But here's the thing. It was erotic when it came out to me in the 80s. Now, people might laugh at it. The problem with it's all different. Everything changes. Somebody might want something a little harder than that, but it depends. But I would start with Two Moon Junction. Now, though, you kind of have to couch it like it's an 80s movie, and I don't know if it would work as an erotic thriller. I don't know, and it depends how erotic you want to go, of course. And I think an incredibly erotic movie is Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, and there's no nudity in that at all. It's all about the tease and the longing and the yearning, and I find it to be incredibly erotic. But there's no sex in it, and so that it really depends, and that's why you have to know who it is you're dealing with and what it is that they like, because what was erotic once. I mean, how is anything erotic when you can just jump to the act? It's and then the act is over. Eroticism is all about the buildup. It's all about anticipation. It's all about desire. It's all about wanting. It's when that feeling, you can never convey this, but when a woman that you're interested in walks by you, and just her scent, when it lingers in the air, and what that does do people even feel that anymore? I mean, I don't know. I know a girl, I've known this girl for a very, 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 very long time. She wears the same perfume she wore when she was in high school. I can't be in proximity to her. I can't. It drives me absolutely. It is the most. It's the most intoxicating thing in the world. The sense memory of it all. It's just I can't. To this day, yeah. But that's what eroticism's all about. And today, I don't know. Does anybody? I think people would probably laugh at Two Moon Junction. I'll say this: when I used to show it to girls in college, it always worked. But I was in much better shape then. So, Apocalypse Cow, while I can't necessarily convince everybody to go out and watch Two Moon Junction, or, yeah. So, what can I say? It's all up to you guys. Can't even. Let's see. Major Chai Chai says Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint talking on the train in North by Northwest is fire. See, there you go. It's true. It is true. By the way, I just recently rewatched that. My God, that 4K restoration is beautiful. Let's see. I think I'm all caught up. Beautiful. But this is a long journey, a very fun thing, and you guys are great. But yeah, I mean, I don't know where we're gonna go. It's gonna be, look, President Trump is going to be inaugurated for the second time on Monday, and I choose to, now that my 2025 bingo card's been torn up and I have no idea what I had on it. I mean, I hope that there's a lot of really interesting things going on. I mean, Blue Origin did launch its Glenn rocket to success. Starship, it failed in spectacular fashion, but that's what these launches are all about. It was a new version of Starship, and I'm very excited about what the future has in store. On the other hand, I think that the markers falling into strange ideology, and I am always going to be a civilizationist. I'm always going to be a futurist. I want to push forward. I believe in the individual. I believe in individual achievement. I like seeing human beings excel doing all kinds of things. I recently fell down the Polyphia rabbit hole. And so Polyphia, if you know who Tim Henson is or Polyphia, the band, they're incredible. But I've also, if you haven't seen or even know what I'm talking about, look up a band called Polyphia. And just they got a few videos online, but they're a quartet. It's a band. It's 3 guitar players and a drummer, and it's prog rock. It's unbelievable, but there's people that really hate them, and I'm like, how can you hate this? And it's very interesting. But there's all kinds of really great stuff out in the world that I hope people can find. I mean, I'm not. I would like to see less destruction, less death, all that. But I also think that we need to start pushing forward into the future and stop dragging our civilization back into the past. And ancient hatreds aren't the way to go. So we'll see. But I'm excited. I mean, look, the next 4 years, I just want to sit back. I want to continue doing good work. I hope you all are enjoying True Noir if you're listening to it. I'm very, very proud of that. I'd like to continue to do more great work going into the next few months. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Basically, I'm going to be finished with True Noir by the end of this month, and I'm like, now what? We'll see. Sonny Dominguez says, Rob, the answer's easy. 9.5 weeks. One of the most romantic movies ever. Up there with An Affair to Remember. Well, also written by Zalman King, who directed Two Moon Junction. I love 9.5 weeks. The problem with that and showing people 9.5 weeks now is that Mickey Rourke's character does not come off very well. Even though, come on, we both admire him. Come on, he's how cool is he in that movie? Of course, you can't say that anymore because now he's just a dick. I love 9.5 weeks. I love everything about 9.5 weeks. And it's amazing. Although probably a little problematic for certain people. B Thing says, I'm in my 20s. I feel like we all have to be very sexually aware, but not actually being interested in eroticism or sensuality at all. B Things, you said it. I think you're absolutely right. Isn't that weird? Like, I have to tell you, for a generation of people who you've got, OnlyFans has been normalized. Everybody's walking around everybody's so scantily clad. You guys are like the least sexy generation in American history. I'm talking about Americans now. Around the rest of the world, it is so weird. Like it's sex has become totally like weird and transactional. There's no eroticism. There's no sensuality at all. You see these beautiful girls walking around until they open up their mouths, and it's like, what the fuck? Wow. Sensuality and eroticism, there's a certain level of self-awareness and intellectualism that comes along with it as well. Because remember, a lot of great sex begins in the mind. You have to be an imagination connoisseur to be a sexual connoisseur as well. You have to be really good at it. But as Neil Gaiman proved, you could have a great imagination and be really lousy in bed. But isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? You have to be very sexually aware, but not be interested in eroticism, sensuality. All isn't it? Why do you think that is? How did that happen? Thomas Logan says, you got your wish, Bobby. We now have a minister of cinema, the legend that is Mel Gibson, his vice chair Stallone, both stewards of American cinema. And also, isn't John Voight, like these are all ambassadors of cinema that Trump appointed, right? I can't say what or whom, but I hope that John Voight is instrumental in well, I can't really say. I can't. But I'd like to see John Voight be instrumental in accomplishing something. I hope happens in 2025. But yeah, and Mel Gibson, by the way, has a new movie coming out. He has that movie coming out with Mark Wahlberg, who is driving or flying a prisoner with an FBI agent, and he turns out to be working. He's a hitman, and Mel Gibson directed that movie. It's not called Flight. It's called something like, I don't remember what the title of the movie is, but it's coming out like next week. It's opening in theaters, which is exciting. But I love Sonny Dominguez. I love Sonny that you equated an affair to remember with 9.5 weeks. But that's actually quite a good double feature. That's the kind of double feature. You know what's really funny? I don't think I would show like 9.5 weeks to college students. I think that people would get triggered and get mad, which is odd. And does anybody even watch that? Has anyone seen 9.5 weeks? It's so weird to me because all these things. I mean, you talk to people about Porky's and Last American and Virgin, and it's all the male gaze and it's whatever. Actually, Two Moon Junction is not just about the male gaze. I mean, maybe it's the male gaze from the audience's perspective, but it's about a female's awakening, which I always find much more interesting. But anyway, I think I'm going to end this fine chat and go back to editing True Noir, the assassination of Anton Cermak, who's been, by the way, assassinated, at least from my perspective. Spoiler alert, he's dead. But listen, I want to thank everybody for joining me on this very fun trip out there. Out into the world of social media, the antisocial. I thought that article was pretty great. And you know, one of the things in 2025 I'm going to do is I'm going to lean more heavily into doing essay stuff and opining on things that I'm interested in, not just movies and TV. But I have to say, Major Chai Chai, as it gets ever closer, I'm already sharpening my blades about Section 31. Look, maybe it'll be good, but I would give the you know what? The odds of Section 31 being good are the exact odds that C-3PO gave Han Solo to successfully navigate an asteroid field, and that's 3,720 to 1 against. So there you go. Star Wars odds applied to a new Star. I never thought that there would ever come a time in my life where I dreaded a Star Trek movie. I guess I dreaded Star Trek Into Darkness and Star Trek Beyond, but not as much. Section 31, man. Ooh. Whoa, Nelly. 1001 Johnny said, "Did I see the white hair tip?" Is that a euphemism? Or that you said, 1001 Johnny says, "White hair suggests wisdom. I always thought Steve Martin was the smartest man in the room for this very reason." Well, as long as you think so. As long as you think so. I don't know if that's true, but I'd like to believe it. I would like to believe it. But thank you for that, 1001 Johnny. Yeah, and thanks to everybody. So I think I will jump off this call. I will be back tomorrow for you members at 11. I think it's at 11. And we'll have a member call. I don't know how long I can have it go. And then tomorrow night, Dave Parker returns for the first Midnight Metal of 2025. So, Thomas Logan, you can ask Dave Parker about Lost Highway and David Lynch. Our subject matter is elevated horror. Has elevated horror harmed the horror genre? Or not? So, and on that note, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. By the way, on Monday, you're going to see me show up at a place that I haven't been in a long time. So look out for that Monday morning. That's all I'm going to say. You can guess. Not hard to guess, but that's all I'm going to say. All right, everybody. As always, have a better night.